A couple of years ago, I made a video about a movie known as 0 Day. It was a found footage movie that documented two teenagers, Cal and Andre, as they prepared to attack their school. It was very clearly inspired by Columbine, but it wasn't a shot-for-shot remake by any means. Still, despite this, it had an eerie similarity to The Basement Tapes, a collection of home movies that Dylan Klebold and Eric Harris left behind before they entered their school and took the lives of 13 people. The Basement Tapes have mostly been suppressed, with some saying they've even been destroyed, but throughout the years we have been given transcripts and a few scraps of footage that have given us an idea of what Dylan and Eric were trying to leave behind. And by watching these clips, you can tell that 0 Day captured this energy to a T. There is a video on YouTube that compiles every bit of footage that Dylan and Eric are in, and when you have seen 0 Day, this video is uncanny, and it makes you realize how faithful 0 Day was to the source material. It's important to note that the director of 0 Day, Ben Cocchio, didn't even have access to this footage. This movie was made in the early 2000s, and at this stage, the media were all over the place, trying to blame video games and Marilyn Manson. 0 Day could have very easily leaned into this, but instead they truly explored what it would be like if two teenagers planned an attack on their school and documented the process. And ever since I watched it, it has stuck with me more than any other movie in the last 10 or so years. I even had the honor of interviewing Andre from the movie, and he answered some burning questions about the project that made me like it even more. Simply put, I think this movie is the best example of how to cover a topic that is confusing, nuanced, and difficult. It doesn't shy away from the reality of what they are doing, but it doesn't turn them into romantic villains either. It explores them in a way that is raw, honest, and at times uncomfortable. But if you clicked on this video, you know that we're not here to talk about 0 Day. Because when I made that video, I got a lot of comments from people that said I should check out another movie. It's a film that was also inspired by Columbine. It takes an artistic approach to the case and shows a close-up and raw look into a horrifying day. It ticks a lot of boxes, and theoretically I should like it, but no matter how hard I try, I simply can't say that I'm a huge fan of this movie. And today I'm going to tell you why. So without further ado, let's address the elephant in the room. Elephant was released in 2003 and directed by Gus Van Sant. It was inspired by a 1989 short movie with the same name that was directed by Alan Clark. This movie was set in the north of Ireland during the Troubles and featured 18 people being killed in just 38 minutes. It has very little dialogue, no backstory, and the viewers aren't given a reason as to why any of this is happening. A writer known as Bernard McLafferty described the Troubles as the elephant in our living room, and this is where the movie's title comes from. It addressed a cultural denial that was happening in the area and put an uncomfortable magnifying glass on the violence and bloodshed that was happening at the time. Almost a decade and a half later, Gus Van Sant created a feature-length movie of the same name, and the inspiration was clear as day. Long walking shots that were done in a single take, close-ups of the characters and their physical features, and no special effects whatsoever. This movie was an unconventional look at a tragedy that shook America to its core. Except instead of mostly focusing on the killers, Gus Van Sant uses the majority of this movie's screen time focusing on the people that will ultimately be affected by the tragedy. We're introduced to characters like John, Michelle, a couple known as Nathan and Carrie, and a few other students that simply go about their morning as if it was any other school day. Because when it boils down to it, that's exactly what happened in Columbine until the attack began. It was a typical day and the students acted as such, and within the blink of an eye, everything changed. The second that Dylan Klebold and Eric Harris entered Columbine, the day-to-day activities of a typical student were an insignificant blur. But Elephant puts a magnifying glass on these very same details, and it puts the power and the focus back into the hands of the people who were actually affected by the shooting. Now you may be thinking none of this sounds like a problem, and for the most part it isn't. I think this movie has a lot of artistic merit, and it's an interesting look at a complicated topic. Over the years it's only gotten more popular. Only recently there was a video made about Elephant that has gotten over 1 million views. It also talks about the camera work and the movie's artistry, and for the most part I agree with these things as well. But unfortunately Elephant has a few flaws that are so glaring I just can't seem to get past them. And it starts with these two.
Most importantly, have fun, man. Yeah, man.
20 minutes into the movie, we are introduced to Eric and Alex. They're wandering into the school, about to launch their attack. From here, the timelines bounce around and we don't see much of Eric. In fact, we won't see him for another 25 minutes. Instead, we see Alex walking around the school, planning things out and getting bullied in his classroom. When we finally are introduced to Eric, we can clearly tell that Alex is the leader. The movie presents this in almost a comical fashion. Alex is literally playing Beethoven on the piano, while Eric is killing people in a video game. This is more than likely based on the report reports that in the actual Columbine attack, the media tried to say that this dynamic existed, that Eric Harris was the leader and Dylan Klebold was his simple follower. Harris had killed more people and shot more bullets on the actual day and was generally described as more temperamental, while Klebold was described as relatively soft-spoken. However, when the transcripts of the basement tapes were released, as well as Klebold's journals, we saw something different. He was not just along for the ride. In his journals, he had serious delusions of grandeur. He described himself as a god. He had helped plan the actual attack. He taunted people while he killed them, and despite the initial reports, Dylan Klebold was not a reluctant killer. He was just a killer. He was sadistic, twisted, and every other superlative you can think of, but when I watch Elephant, I feel like Gus Van Sant has fallen for the media's portrayal of Columbine, and he too plays into this strange notion that one of these mass murderers is just along for the journey, while his best friend is the real mastermind who plans everything out to a T and uses his loyal followers nothing more than a pawn in this attack. They go so far with this narrative that after Alex and Eric are pretty much done attacking the school, Alex gets up and kills Eric. This is also based on a rumor that Eric Harris killed Dylan Klebold during the Columbine attack, but again, this was quickly debunked, and still Elephant implemented it into the script. Finally, there's a scene in the movie where the killers take a shower together and start kissing, insinuating that there's some kind of romantic dynamic between the pair, and yet again, I feel like this is based on another rumor that Dylan Klebold and Eric Harris had some kind of romantic relationship together, when there was absolutely no evidence to suggest that this was the case. Also, 6 minutes before this scene, they're very nonchalantly watching Nazi propaganda in Alex's living room, which makes any intimate scene between the pair feel kind of silly. And this is really where the movie starts to fall apart for me. I don't think Elephant needs to get every single detail of the source material correct. It's allowed to have some kind of artistic license, and it's not a documentary, but when it strays so far away from the source material, it starts to feel like something else. I don't know what school shooting featured two romantically involved Nazis where one of the shooters kills the other at the end of it, but it was not Columbine, and considering that the most consistent piece of praise this movie gets is the fact that it's so realistic, it seems strange to get so many details wrong or to write a script based on unsubstantiated rumors that do not hold any weight. Another criticism this movie gets revolves around some of the dialogue. Gus Van Sant casted actual high schoolers in this movie and he allowed them to improvise, which occasionally gives us some interesting moments, but it's hard to deny that some of these scenes are kind of difficult to watch because of how silly the dialogue is.
Portraits mainly.
Like naked people?
No.
No. You want us to go get naked with you? Take our picture?
No.
No.
You know what? You don't have to worry about it. You know why? Because we're going to be having a blast for buying, as long as you got to promise to show up.
Are you joking?
I hope she didn't see you. She's not gonna do anything. She hit a girl last time for that.
Hit a girl.
Now, this was apparently deliberately done. It's supposed to reflect the realities of those awkward teenage years where young people do say janky, goofy things to each other, and although I can kinda see the vision for that, the dialogue is so flat and under-delivered at times that it actually reminds me that I am watching a piece of fiction. It doesn't feel natural or immersive, and whenever I see a scene like this, I am totally taken out of the world that Gus Van Sant is trying to build. I don't want to constantly compare Elephant to Zero Day, but considering they were released around the same time and they cover similar subject matter, it's kind of hard not to. And when you look at the dialogue in Zero Day, you can really see the difference. It's still a little bit awkward at times, it's still goofy and juvenile, and the actors were also encouraged to improvise and be as natural as possible, but all of this adds to the immersion. They say silly things from time to time like any teenager would, but the difference is the teenagers in Zero Day feel like characters, and the teenagers in Elephant feel like caricatures. This more than likely boils down to the fact that Ben Koshio was in his early 20s when he wrote Zero Day. When Columbine happened, he was not that far removed from his own teenage years, but Van Sant was 51 years of age when he wrote Elephant, and I don't even blame him for being unable to write realistic dialogue or not being able to guide these actors into creating that kind of dialogue because he was so far removed from that world. The final piece of criticism I'll give to Elephant relates to the strange reactions that some of the characters have to the actual shooting. There are these scenes where some of the students are just nonchalantly walking around while there's multiple active shooters inside of their school, and again, it feels unrealistic and out of place, but I have seen a theory that this is happening because the actual response to Columbine by the police was slow and lacked any kind of real urgency. Some of these characters are apparently supposed to reflect that, but even this character here, who is the prime example of these nonchalant reactions, actually held helps people while he is walking around, and that kind of shatters any strange metaphor that people try to tack on to these scenes. At this stage, you might notice that every single time this movie gets criticized, there's some kind of automatic response that people have because of this movie's perceived artistic value. They only messed up the details of the case for the benefit of storytelling. The reason the dialogue is so awkward is because high schoolers are awkward. The only reason they're walking around nonchalantly is because it's a criticism of the police's slow response time, and maybe some of that is true, but there's also the possibility that this is a flawed piece of work that has good parts and bad parts. Elephant is a unique movie. There's no denying it, but when you are constantly told that this movie is a prime example of an artistic, avant-garde film, your brain starts to prescribe value to things that aren't necessarily deliberate. If the project is artistic, then every choice must be artistic. There's a reason for everything, and it's all part of a grand design. But realistically, I don't think it's that complex or deep. I think Elephant was really well directed, and at times I think it was very poorly written. It had great cinematography and bad dialogue. It put an important magnifying glass on the victims, and it got all of the details of the actual case wrong. It is an interesting movie, but it is filled with flaws, and sometimes those flaws are just too much to ignore.